Welcome to the Constructing Mindsets podcast. This podcast is about having real, honest conversations and shining a more positive light on the construction industry. Hearing from people across the trades, on-site and in leadership roles. It also connects with the wider work I do, supporting site leaders and managers, improve communication, mindset and problem solving through online modules, in-person workshops and coaching. Thanks for joining us on this one. Let's get into the episode. Today's episode is a really important one for our industry and lots of industries. We talk a lot about safety, risk, pressure and performance, not always about how leadership, mindset and everyday behaviours actually influence long-term outcomes. My guest today works at a national level across health and safety and risk, operating in complex high-pressure environments. What I look forward to unpacking in this conversation today is how safety and risk management move beyond compliance and move into culture, influence, and sustainable performance for teams. Thanks so much for coming on. Ben Mathews, how are you?
I'm good. Long time no see. Good to see you.
That's good. Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. Are you in Auckland or Melbourne at the moment? I was a bit confused by that.
Yeah, I know. I said that throws it off everyone because I think we're on our LinkedIn and it only says like Kmart Target Australia. But yeah, I'm based here in Auckland.
Okay, cool. Okay, for now. Okay, sweet. And yeah, so just to get us started off, can you give us a bit of a background on your career journey and how you ended up working across health and safety and risk at a national level?
Yeah, it's definitely, I would definitely describe it as a journey. I actually, while I was at school with yourself, I had a part-time job at Bunnings, just working there on the weekends to pay for petrol and things like that. And while I was there, I joined the safety committee for the store that I was working in and just did a couple of things through there. Managed to meet who's now one of my good friends, Louise Speed, who was the safety manager for Bunnings at the time. And she, just had a chat to her about some safety stuff that was happening on site and some ideas and things. And she asked me if I'd be keen to come in and do some, help with some projects in the national space. And I thought, yeah, why not? Like some extra hours, extra money, why not? And so I really enjoyed that, really liked working in that team. And then I sort of got to the end of my uni degree doing a teaching degree and kind of thought, I don't really think this is for me. Like it sounded good. All my friends are doing this. But after my last 20-week practicum, I was like, nah, I don't think this is right for me. And fortunately, at the time, Bunnings had created a new role for managing work-related injuries and asked me if I'd be keen to do that. So I put my hand up and said, yeah, why not? Like brand new role, get to shape it myself. And that was, that's a few years ago now. But that was my first role in a safety team. And since then have just become really curious about safety within organizations and why people choose to do things the way they do, what influences that from a leadership, culture, process point of view. And I've just sort of, taken opportunities as they've come my way. And, I like to say worked hard as well, and had fun. But sort of moved across Australia to the UK in different safety roles and then back here to New Zealand working for Kmart Group.
Cool. And so, we were all at school. You were working hard and developing your skills to take them to the next level. And here we are. So we were all kicking around at school and you had a part-time job. So great, good for you. Well, we were all doing nothing. Anyway, just to give us a bit of a background on like what you're doing currently, like what does your current role look like day to day at the moment?
My role is actually quite broad because working across Kmart, Target, that's all the stores, distribution centres, supply chain, and our national offices, and also supporting our new stores over in the Philippines, the Anko stores there. So my day-to-day is just extremely varied. You can imagine the sort of risk profile across all of those different business units and the sort of projects that come along. So we actually just rolled our implemented eco portal, so a new safety management, injury management, risk management system across all of those sites. So prior to that, we had about 8 different systems, which made data collection and reporting really confusing for everyone. So massive project to bring that all into one place, giving our team members access at their fingertips for tools that they need around safety, but also to report things, to manage an injury, to check in. Then outside of, projects like those huge ones, supporting the team with implementing critical risk, so critical risk controls, lots of reporting obviously across our organisation right up to Wes Farmers board level, and also have a team that our safe space support team, which is where our sites can contact for sort of low level triage advice. So where do I find this form, or what training is for this, or can you help me with something? That team's sort of like a call center for our 450 stores to reach up and get advice. And then outside of that, like run a whole lot of facilitated workshops, training sessions across the organization on lots of different topics to help build capability across our leadership teams.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like a very, very broad and very intense role.
Mm.
Yeah, like how has that changed obviously from now till when you first started at the business you're working in? Like what are you doing now than maybe what wasn't there?
If I think about like when I first started at Bunnings, that's my first foray into safety, and we were reporting things on like a piece of paper and putting them in a filing cabinet, and I don't ever know what happened to those things. But I even think about like some of my own behaviors and the things that I did at that age when I was working, and a lot more risk taking, and safety wasn't necessarily like front of mind for me personally. And it wasn't sort of until I got into the safety and wellbeing team that I really started to think differently about this. And back then I was naturally just always interested around people's behavior and like the psychology element of it. That just really, there was something in that just really lit a fire for me, or really, wanted to lean into. I was less interested in the compliance. So the legislation, the rules, the guidelines, like that just seemed really like boring to me. And I also could see that didn't resonate very well for people on the front line as well. And so my curiosity was always in that space. Like, how can we make this better? How do we improve safety so it makes sense that we do it with them rather than to them? How can we simplify things? How do we make it easier to do things safely? And so like my mindset is still the same. Like 20 years later, I'm still in that space, constantly challenging the organization to go, hey, where can we remove these roadblocks or silly rules that don't make sense or are a hindrance to the work? But how can we put things in place that actually help build capability, increase capacity, and improve the chances of things going well? And so I think that's just like a continuous journey, like across every organization is at a different point in that stage. And we're wrestling with that all the time. And I think about sort of some of the safety tools that we have out there at the moment, like standard operating procedures or SWIMs. And I think, have we really shifted with the times there? Like I know, way back when, like that made sense when your job was step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you followed a clear process like that. Here's a document that shows you how to do that safely. But our world is just so different now. So much more complex, so much more dynamic. Like it's impossible to have a procedure that covers everything to keep people safe. And so how do we move from like a rules-based sort of thinking to more risk-based, where we empower our people to make decisions, give them the tools to do that, but don't get so hung up on having like this prescriptive document that tries to capture every single safety outcome or every single possible risk. Like it's just, you're going to be chasing your tail forever, and you probably have thousands and thousands of pieces of paper trying to do that. So as much as I'd like to say it has changed in New Zealand, I think everyone's sort of slowly on that journey, and hopefully we get to that point where safety becomes more just a BAU, like we're empowering people to do it rather than telling them what to do.
Yeah, like I think it's kind of funny to talk about New Zealand maybe being like a little bit slightly behind. Like when I worked in the UK in construction, it kind of felt like New Zealand was maybe like 5 to 10 years maybe behind sort of what some of the bigger projects are doing in the UK. And like underground, obviously the projects are bigger and obviously more complex, but their safety systems and the thought around people sort of taking safety there for their own responsibility, like that seemed a little bit more common in the UK. Anyway, it's just a thought. From your experience, what do organizations often misunderstand about health and safety and risk?
Organizations misunderstanding? I think it's just perhaps having like a narrow view of safety and risk. And so trying to broaden their thinking around what is risk, how do you measure safety performance? And I think one of the narrow views is that safety performance is measured by injury. So, more injuries means terrible safety performance, less injury means good safety performance. But really, like that's only just one metric, right? Like there's so many, if you think about your overall health and well-being, you wouldn't just rate your well-being based on like how many beats your heart does per minute, right? Like there's so many other factors that tell you whether you're healthy or not. And it's the same with safety performance. Like injury performance is just one metric that we can use, but like there's so many around engagement, around critical control performance, how much effort and energy is put into safety, what's the, capacity or resources. And so it's trying to, I think, it's not necessarily misunderstanding health and safety, but it's just sort of broadening their minds there to go, hey, actually, there's a whole lot of data points out here. How do we get those to you in a meaningful way that tells you a story around really what's happening in your organization? Because you could have 0 injuries and think everything is great and your safety performance is awesome, but perhaps that's just people not feeling safe to speak up or not reporting those things. And so that can be a false sense of security, those numbers as well. So we need to broaden our perspective and our thinking around what data is actually going to be helpful for us to tell us whether we're performing well or, there's some opportunities there.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting insight because, a lot of construction companies, in particular, would just look at injuries per year and have a rating per year, and as long as that's dropping, that's like, hey, we're doing a great job here. It's super interesting thing to think about. Where do you see some of the biggest gaps between policies on paper and behaviors in reality? I know it's a pretty broad question, but gaps between, hey, you should be doing this, and then in behavior, they're like, what are those guys doing over there? Or what are they doing over there? That's completely different.
Yeah. I think the issue is because, well, the issue can be because it's people like myself that are in a national office role writing these policies and procedures, right? But I'm so far removed from the person that's actually doing the role, driving the forklift, picking up that load, or, driving that huge truck or crane or whatever it is. So really, am I the best person to be writing that? Like, it might be because, I've got a degree, whatever, and I can formally write those things. But does that really correspond or relate to the person on the front line? Are they the best people placed to know, okay, what is the safest way to do that? How do I document that? And some things that I've seen really cool is where our team personally, we try not to just sit behind a desk and write these things, but actually get out there and understand those challenges, what gets in the way, like what slows work down, makes it difficult. And we've used a concept which we've sort of rebranded in our world called operational learning, but it's based on the 4Ds framework. And it's quite popular at the moment around, asking people on the front line what's difficult, what's dangerous, what doesn't make sense, and what's dumb about the work that you do. Using those 4 questions deliberately to really open up a conversation with people on the front line to understand those challenges, and then listening and taking that back and going, okay, well, how can we improve our safety procedures, our controls, our training, how we plan work, how we communicate. It's really about, trying to bridge the gap between what happens in the ivory tower or the head office versus the front line. And what's that gap there that we can try and unpack by just asking open questions and then really listening and taking action on the back of that.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, you talked about the what in front of the 4Ds and talked about open questions. I think so many conversations can be such closed questions. Like, is your day going well? Yes. Have you had any health and safety injuries lately? No. It's but the conversation should be a lot more broader around how you could work together as a collective to, in my point of view, how can you gather a team together to finish a project on site? Having those open questions really just kind of opens the door to other insights and other people's perspective on things that you in the ivory tower might not actually know what's happening down there. It's a cool insight, I think.
Yeah. Those 4 questions are so easy to ask and, they're really easy to remember as well. It's just 4Ds. And the conversation that opens up, well, what can, come out of those conversations is so much gold. And, it does rely on the relationship. We couldn't just have, a top level manager go into a store that has never talked to that team before and expect to have this really psychologically safe and open conversation. And so you still do need to have some sort of level of respect and relationship and trust there because, people are going to really start talking about what's dumb, what's difficult. They need to know that they're sharing that with someone that will listen, not judge, not try to justify or explain their way around why we do something. It's really, those conversations really is about not so much you talking, but you listening to the front line and then thinking about, okay, well, this is, whether you agree with it or not, this is their lived experience. This is what they're saying. And so it's up to us to then absorb that and reflect on that and go, okay, what can we do differently to help? the messaging there or the understanding there or changing the way we plan that work or designed that work, because the experience, whether we believe it or not, that's what they're feeling, you know?
Mm.
So those questions I think are really helpful, and yeah, they are open questions deliberately so that, you know, you're not just getting yes or no or nods, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Sweka, you talked about a lot of the pressure, sort of a lot of things going on in our life at the moment, like very, very complex lives, juggling multiple things at the moment. Sort of a lot of incidents potentially don't come from lack of knowledge. They come from maybe a poor decision was made under pressure, or something else going on in someone's life that kind of influences them to maybe take a shortcut or do something a little bit quicker. How do you see mindset influencing sort of risks and behaviors on a daily basis, or from where you're working at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's quite, you know, like you can answer that from many angles, you know, like if I think about our team in my situation, our team in stores, sometimes they will make a decision or behave in a certain way because of their innate values, like the things that are
Mm-hmm.
really important to them. So if I think, for example, like we have a rule that says, you know, you don't detain a customer or don't try and grab their bag. You can, you know, ask them to look in their bag and, you know, check their receipt and everything. But our role is to not, we're not the police. We shouldn't be, you know, tackling people to the ground or trying to stop them from leaving the store, because you just never know what weapons they might have or how that's going to go. But for some people, they have really strong values around, you know, injustice in the world. And so when they see things that, you know, clash with those values, they can't help but step in and, you know, potentially try and de-escalate a conflict between someone else, or, you know, they're seeing wrong in the world and they want to take the right action. And so, you know, being mindful of that people have those values, but also when you are employed with Kmart Group, we've also got our own values as well. And so how do we make sure that our rules are really clear, that, there's reasons why we don't step in or we don't do those things. And so acknowledge that, you know, have really strong values around this, and you don't like to see the injustice in the world, but hey, whilst you're at work, this is what you can do about that. So instead of grabbing the trolley, that you can use the body worn cameras, you can call for help, you can call security. Like, these are the tools available whilst you're at work to do that. Obviously can't control what you do outside of work. So if you see something, you know, on the footy field or something like that, like you handle that however you want to. But whilst you're at work, like, there's certain ways of that we can help support you manage that, because we agree we don't want to see these things happen either, but there's proper ways so that you don't get hurt, that others don't get hurt. And so I find, like, you know, thinking about that binary term of like, was that a good decision or a poor decision? You know, I think people always make decisions based on the information they had at the time and the context. And so, you know, I always try and think to myself, like, yeah, perhaps that does sound like a poor decision. You know, like, why would you do that? Why would you stand in front of that person that's got a weapon or try and grab that trolley when they're 3 times bigger than you? But I have to remind myself that, like, in the moment, in the context of what was happening with the emotion, the noise, all the people around, like, that felt like the right decision for that person at the time. And, you know, there's no point, I don't really see too much point in punishing those people, because, you know, if they do get hurt or if they are involved in something, like, is that not punishment enough? And I think, you know, most people would learn from that next time and be like, okay, well, next time, yeah, I'm probably not going to go up against that person that's 3 times bigger than me or near that person with a weapon, because hopefully I've, you know, learned from that.
Yeah.
And then how do we support them after those events?
How do you kind of align values if maybe someone has different values? Or
Yeah. And I mean, that's going to happen all the time, you know, like, we've got, I think, almost 50,000 team members across our organization. And whilst I would love to say, like, yeah, everyone, like, we all have the same values, like, well, what a boring place to work that would be, you know, if that was the case. And so
Yeah.
I think it's important that there's, like, diversity there. But whilst you might have different values and some of your values might have higher weighting than perhaps other ones, ultimately, like, we should be aligned. You should be able to see yourself in this organization. Those values connect with you. If not, you know, naturally, if that was me, I'd be asking, maybe this isn't the right place for me, you know, like, I feel like there's conflict here between our values. You know, the way, you know, things play out here wouldn't, not acceptable for me, and vice versa. You know, the organization can also be like, hey, your values or how you're behaving don't align with us. And so there's a conversation there. But yeah, I think when you're this large, like, you're always going to have that sort of tension between values. And so I think for us, it's making sure those values are not just a slogan or, you know, a screensaver, a wallpaper on a team's background, that they actually are lived values. And so we hold each other to account for those things. We demonstrate those in our actions, particularly leaders, senior leaders across the organization. And we call things out when people aren't living those values in a healthy, respectful way.
Yeah, I think it's a great insight. And just kind of maybe to turn on sort of the systems part of the conversation, like we're talking about safety culture, there's going to be some systems in there. Sort of in construction and other large organizations, they rely heavily on systems, controls, and procedures. Sort of what, at the end of the day, like what does good safety leadership actually look like in practice with all the systems behind it?
Yeah, it's funny because we talk about systems, but I don't think people, and I didn't for a while, naturally think that people are also part of the system. And so the system isn't just like the equipment, the policies, procedures, the tools. Like your people are also part of that system, because if you took them away, like great, you've got this like procedure, you've got all this equipment, but you don't have anyone to operate it or to make that happen. And so, yeah, if we think about like investing in our system, like making sure equipment's maintained, making sure our procedures are up to date, that our training, reflects real world, we should also have the same amount of investment into our people as well, so building their capability, supporting them, relationships with them, investing in them as well. They're equally, if not more important, cog of that overall system. And so I think like when I think about good safety leadership, and this is a model that you can Google, it's from Centis in Australia, their safety experience model. And so they talk about 3 key things, which is the physical, the psychological, and the social environment. And so I think about those things as sort of essentially for me, I think about them as a system. And so how much are we investing in the physical environment? So, making sure that the workplace is condoning healthy and safe behaviors. From a psychological perspective, like how much are we investing into designing work that is healthy, that our policies, our procedures that support people's mental health are supportive, and we're asking for that feedback as well from our team. And then that social piece, so like what do relationships look like? What is the connection between the team harmony, the team culture, like all of those sort of 3 things are, like if we invest in those 3 things, there shouldn't, that's what I would see good leadership. We just invest in one, like, people will be like, well, what's going on here? Like, we've got all this fancy equipment and that's great. But like, God, my boss is so hard to talk to. He never calls me, doesn't ask me how I'm going. Like we barely have team meetings, like you got to sort of invest in all 3 of those things. It's not one or the other for me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, cool. That's a great answer, I think. How would you say the best way to balance accountability with trust is? Like, because you talked a lot about getting sort of self-assurance, safety, and sort of empowering the staff to do a great job and look after their own safety. But sort of where's the line between accountability and trust in sort of your experience?
Yeah, I think trust is such a good indicator. If there was a really easy way to measure that as a safety performance, I think we make a lot of money. It's a hard one. But I think, accountability for me is, I guess it comes back to that like psychological piece and leadership, like how well is the role clarity defined for people? How clear is it around what they're responsible for and what their remit is versus someone that just needs to be informed or consulted. And so I think if your team doesn't have role clarity, then it's really hard to hold people to account. But that also creates like psychosocial hazards, like if I'm not clear what my responsibilities are or my accountability are, and I'm waiting for you to do this, but you're waiting for me, like then that just creates issues. And so I think accountability, it's really clear on the role clarity, who's responsible for what, who to escalate things to if there is an issue. But then that's when the trust component comes in. And so you can have really clear accountability and, guidelines and position descriptions. But if things aren't, going to plan, if I'm falling behind on my KPIs or the things that I'm accountable for, but we have low trust, it's unlikely that I'm going to speak up to you and let you know those things. Or worse, I'll just say that everything's fine. And then we miss those deadlines or, that doesn't get done. And so I think, it's one of those ones where I'm probably talking like a politician, but you kind of like, you need both equally, I think. And I'll probably say hand on heart, trust for me is probably the more important one. I've been in teams where, there hasn't been great role clarity, but we've got good trust and good teamwork and connection. And so sometimes that does help. And whilst we figure out the role clarity piece, but I think if you don't have good trust, you're not going to hear about, if we're falling behind KPIs or things aren't going on track or they're off track. You need that to also be able to hold people account, but also to support them as well, So your role is not just holding people to account and making sure that they get the job done, it's to support them. So if they do speak up and say there's roadblocks, there's issues here, I don't have enough resource, or this has landed on me last minute and it's going to impact this. Like, you need those conversations so that you can help shift the accountability goals or workshop that with your team to understand that more, rather than just why have you missed this? Why haven't you done this?
Yeah, and then like you said, like, you can't lean on any of your team. It's just a finger pointing exercise at the end of the day, and then you lose that team culture as well. Sweet. Well, just going through a little bit of a maybe personal perspective, sort of changing tact a little bit. Like, working at a national level in safety and risk carries a lot of responsibility. You talked about your day to day and all the things you've got going on. You briefly touched on it earlier on, but sort of specifically, how has your own leadership mindset evolved over time? And sort of any examples or anything that you do now to either sort of help with pressure or help with stress, or sort of what have you learned and evolved over your time?
Yeah, great question. I feel like the biggest thing for me is that when you're a leader, your leadership style has to adapt. And so you can't just be like a one-trick pony almost. Like, depending on your team and who's in your team, you sort of have to take on different leadership styles. So if I think about my team, there's a wide range of experience there. You've got some really great people that could take my role when I, go to something else. And then there's other people that are brand new, like I was 20 years ago. So they have different needs. They require different leadership styles. So, the people that are more experienced, I'll check in with them, but they don't need hand-holding. They don't need micromanaging. I don't like that word, but like close support, supervision. Whereas the ones that are new in the team, they need more support, more guidance, more checking in. And so your leadership style just has to change based on the needs of your team. And that's probably like not the biggest learning, but it's probably been the one that stuck with me the most, is like, tailoring my style. It can't just be, one size fits all for everyone. You really got to understand your team, where they're at on that journey. And even the more experienced ones, sometimes if they've been given a project that they've never done before, or this is outside of their comfort zone, you might need to lean in more to more check-ins, more support than you normally would. And so I think, the key for me is like trying to understand your team at a deeper level to really understand like what leadership style is going to be best for them. And it's not about you changing as a person. Like, you still stay the same. I do. Like, I don't change at all, but those behaviors, those check-ins, those follow-ups, that support changes depending on what's going on for them.
How do you personally, again, talking about a lot of your role, a lot of pressure there, how do you personally manage pressure or fatigue in your work at the moment?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. Like, I think sometimes, like everyone is a human, right? And I can say like, oh, you should do all of this. And it's like exercise, healthy eating, journaling, mindfulness, talking. And like, that's great. And it does help, definitely. But it doesn't take it away. So like, the pressure's still there. The stress is still there, particularly if you're leading a project or there's tight deadlines. But I think those things do help. And so it helps you, stay calm, composed in those moments. So you can acknowledge that there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of stress, acknowledging that, but then keeping to those habits of, how do I make sure I can support myself through this stressful time? And as long as that sort of doesn't go on for too long, like if that's your every day and it has been for months and months, then there's probably something there around the work design that's not right, that you probably need to look at that. But every now and then, there'll be projects that come up that put a bit of additional pressure on us, and I think that's also healthy as well. And like I said, unless it goes on for too long. And so I think like it's up to the individual. So those things work well for me. I just make a conscious effort to make sure I always do something active today, try and connect with my family, the little things that, keep me like physically and mentally healthy and well. But I'll acknowledge like sometimes like that doesn't always help, like if there's something else, like the stressful project at work, or, that's quite big, and then something happens outside of work. If I think about last year, my dog passed away right in the middle of this project, and I was coping well with the pressure and stress of the project until that happened. And then it was just all a bit too much. And so I found like having someone at work that you can openly talk to about those things, just to like vent, get things off your chest, share the frustration or share how you're feeling is super helpful. But I also really love the Māori Te Whare Tapawhā model. So when you are feeling like stress or your well-being is a little bit impacted by these things at work or in your personal life, like leaning into that model and going, hey, where am I perhaps not investing enough? Is it my spiritual? Is it my physical well-being? Is it my mental well-being? Is it my whānau, family, social stuff? Because I find just thinking about that concept reminds me, I haven't spoken to my grandparents in 2 weeks, and that would probably make me feel a lot better if I did that. Or actually, this week I've been pretty average with going to the gym and walking, and that's probably contributing to my resilience around how I can handle this. So that for me is like a nice way to just check in on those things that, even though it's a Māori worldview of model, like we can all connect to those things in our own way, and sort of, where have I not invested enough in my own well-being or my own, Te Whare Tapawhā.
Yeah, that's great. It's kind of just like self-awareness. Like if for me, it's like if you've had a stressful day, it's taking, most of the time everyone's exhausted after the end of their day, no matter what they do. They're tired. They're sitting on the couch. They don't want to get up and go to the gym or go for a run or something, but it's just trying to, maybe not look at the phone for a few seconds, feel how you're feeling, listen to your mind, listen to your body. And then most of the time it's okay, if I just maybe go for a 5-minute walk, that will turn into a 20-minute walk or something like that. For me, it's the hardest part is just obviously getting started at the end of a long day or a long week or long month or long year. If you were sort of, just a couple more questions, some advice for leaders. So if you were someone was listening right now, they were a site manager, a project lead, or a safety professional listening, wanting to learn one habit that improves safety culture, one leadership behavior that reduces risk, or one thing leaders should stop doing, like what one would you want to try and unpack or give any guidance on?
I think one habit that I think is really helpful is just consistency. So particularly like as a leader or a project leader, site manager, safety professional, like consistency there. And I don't say that in terms of like getting it right 100% of the time, like that's just impossible. Like we make mistakes. We like own them when we do. But I think, just consistency. Like if we say this is the way that we're going to do things, like we're consistent with that, and we like build those habits, build that discipline by being consistent. So if it's, every time we come onto site, we have a pre-start and we, talk about the work and what's involved in, what does the team think about that, any issues, any roadblocks, any challenges, like that's a key part of starting our day. So the consistency to discipline to that, because that sets up the whole day. As soon as we go, oh, like we're running behind or I got stuck in traffic, so we'll just skip the pre-start, like this team start to think like, oh, well, how important is this? Like, does that mean that it's okay if I miss the next one, So I don't know if that's the best example, but like just from a consistency point of view, like, if it's always wearing your high vis on site, then you need to, consistently do that. If it's always reporting hazards or speaking up when things aren't great, like consistency in that as well. And when we do slip up, like owning that as well, being like, shit, sorry, I should have spoken up, or I didn't follow that this time. I think one leadership behavior that can reduce risk is really that relationship piece. And so connecting with the front line, really understanding the challenges they face and using that 4D model to really understand the operational challenges, because that's going to help you manage risk or reduce risk. If you're so far removed from the front line and what they're experiencing, like how can you really reduce risk if you don't understand the context or those frustrations or the things that get in the way? And then if one thing leaders should stop doing is asking whose fault is this? Like, I think that's just the worst question ever. We love that. And I think we're driven, like that's driven by the media and like the political environment, like we want to point a finger at everyone and find someone to blame that makes us feel better, that there's an outcome, there's justice. But like, I don't really know if it fixes anything. I struggle with that. And same with incidents when they happen, like we should just be asking, like, what happened? Like, who needs support? What can we learn from this, rather than, who did that or who's at fault to blame? Yeah.
Okay, great. No, I think that's a great last point. Yeah, no, some great insights there. All right, so we do a little quick fire round. So I've just got 5 questions here to end with. I most of the time I kind of know maybe what people will answer this first one on, but I actually don't know with you. So are you coffee or tea?
Yeah, I'm a cappuccino with oat milk. And I used to
Okay.
crack up because I feel like that's like such a, like oat milk. But these days, whenever I go into a cafe, like the amount of tradies that come in and they're like a soy latte or a mocha with oat milk, I'm like, yeah, this is just normal now. I don't need to feel shame about that.
Yeah, I have soy milk now. I don't have dairy anymore because I'm convinced it affects my asthma. So I stopped having dairy milk like 5 years ago, and I think it's made it better. But yeah, we have soy oat milk. I love oat milk. It's great.
Yeah, same, same.
It's great. One mindset every leader needs in a high risk environment.
Yeah, I think, yeah, particularly construction like that is high risk, and I think not just from like a physical safety perspective in terms of the dangers on site, but I think I saw some stats the other week around just the number of suicides in construction and poor mental health. And so my thing, sort of regardless of whether it's high risk or not, I think all leaders should have that sense of like chronic unease. Like you should never feel really satisfied with safety. You should always be thinking like, what am I missing? Or, like what are the early signs that something's not quite right? Like how connected am I to that? How much data or stories am I getting that's making me, not feel confident, but helping me understand like, have we got everything? Are we missing anything? We should just be constantly asking ourselves that, because from one day to the next, things can change so dramatically. And if we think, oh yeah, we've got safety sorted and we've got good controls and processes, the next day can be so different, and the next week can be so different because our environment changes. Like things happen to our people, new people start, people go. And so I think, yeah, for leaders, it would just be that chronic unease, like constantly asking yourself, are we missing anything? What could go wrong here?
Okay, great. Biggest myth about safety.
That zero injuries is good safety performance. I think
Okay,
that for
yeah,
me is the
that's
biggest
a good
one.
one. Yeah. Best way for yourself to reset after a high pressure day.
Yeah, well, I used to be going for a run with my dog, but now not that at all. So no running, but I do still play a little bit of netball, and I find that, yeah, 60 minutes on the court where I don't have to think about any emails, like any meetings. I just have to focus on passing and catching a ball is like just so therapeutic for me. It just takes me out of the whole world for, yeah, 60 minutes, and I find that super relaxing.
And I think playing a little bit of netball is an understatement, obviously, because like, don't you represent? I'm pretty sure I saw like a post. Don't you represent New Zealand in the mixed indoor netball team or something? Like, yeah, like how is that for you? That's the biggest understatement. I play a little bit of netball.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I look at myself and I'm like, God, like, we're talking about like pressure and stress here. And I feel like I definitely contribute to a lot of that for myself, trying to, do this job, but also play like semi-professional netball plus study a degree. Like I don't know why I do this stuff, but yeah, like I've been lucky enough to represent New Zealand and sort of, yeah, tapped out of international duties now and just playing for the Mystics sort of club semi-professional netball. But yeah, if I didn't have that, I'd probably go a bit crazy, I think. So it's a big part of my life.
One thing you wish more people understood about risk and leadership.
I would say that they're both about people. So yeah, risk is about people and how people interact with their environment, with each other. And leadership is about, yeah, how well you understand those people and connect with them and engage. And so I think, yeah, if more leaders could understand that, yeah, for risk to be managed well and for safety to go well, it's really about your people. Like you can have fancy equipment and all the best policies and procedures and smart looking documents, but yeah, how well do you know your people and how they experience safety in your organization or their experience of work, and how well do you ask them questions? How well do you check in? How much do you listen rather than talk to? I
Mm.
think for me, it's, yeah, understanding that those two things are really about people.
Oh, great. And so sort of final question, if listeners take one thing away from this conversation, what would that be? Or what would you want that to be?
I think, yeah, if there's leaders listening here, I think be kind to yourself. Like leadership is a tough gig, not for everyone, and be always open to learning, right? Like I think it's a journey that we go on, and I've learned so much about leadership from people that I've worked with, from reading books, podcasts, from experiences. And then, there's also courses that you can do, but I think real experience is probably the biggest one. So, I make mistakes all the time, definitely not perfect. And I think it's a reminder that leadership comes with huge responsibility, and you have to be really kind to yourself on this journey as well.
Great. Well, Thanks so much for sharing your experience and insights, Ben. It's been a powerful reminder that safety, risk, and performance all come back to leadership and mindset. Like, is there anything you wanted to touch on before we close for that one?
No, just, yeah, hey, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this, and I'm also open to, like, hearing other people's journeys as well. And I also find that super interesting. And I think, regardless of what industry you're in, whether it's construction or, you're selling socks and toys at Kmart, like, we all face the same challenges, and we still have the potential for people to get hurt, and we still have the potential for things to go wrong. And so just because you're in one industry doesn't mean you can't take lessons from another, and vice versa. The more we sort of broaden and connect and share the challenges that we're facing and how we've overcome them, or the ideas for that, I think the safer New Zealand will be.
Oh, great. And sorry, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, how's the best way to get in contact with you, Ben?
Yeah, on LinkedIn is probably the easiest one, but also, you can directly email me, Bennjamin.Mathews@Kmart.
Great. Well, yeah, it's been a pleasure having you, and great to see you again after such a long, long time. That's it for today's episode of Constructing Mindsets. Remember, every conversation is a chance to shift the culture of construction. Subscriptions and reviews are always appreciated. Be sure to reach out if you're needing to improve performance on site by upskilling communication, mindset, and problem solving.